Welcome to the Atlanta Real Estate Podcast. Our mission is to highlight Atlanta, the lifestyle, the amazing homes, communities, industry professionals, and the exceptional Atlanta real estate agents who make it all happen, so buyers and sellers can make better decisions about where to live and which agent is right for you. I'm your host, Mike Miller, and today I have the honor of interviewing Mark Caffiers with DS Murphy Inspections. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Good morning.
Morning. So Mark is a home inspector with DS Murphy Inspections, and I have a lot of questions about home inspecting. You know, like why? Why do you need a home inspection? How often do you need a home inspection? Is it something that you should only get when you're purchasing a home? But let's start at the beginning and just, why do you need a home inspection?
Well, just like anything else, you need a professional to advise you about conditions that exist so that you can do what's best for you and your family. When you're looking at a house, you may be looking at the aesthetics. That's really not what we're looking at. We're not looking at the color of the house and, what the yard looks like. We're literally looking at, how the water is draining off of it, age of systems, how things are functioning. What is there anything unconventional that's going on with the house? And
Okay.
an inspector's purpose is to let the buyer know the conditions that exist so that they can, do what's best for them. We're not there to tell them to buy the house, not buy the house. That's a personal decision.
Okay.
Last year was an unusual year. People were waiving inspections to try to get the deal done, and short due diligences. Now you have with the way the current market is, you have a little bit of a longer time. Longer due diligences are coming back so that you have more time to figure things out and and look deeper into things. Because one
Right.
of the things that I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that's going to surprise people today.
Okay.
Um, but one of the things is that it's not a technically exhaustive inspection, right? If it was technically exhaustive and we took everything apart, you'd be there for a week.
Right.
Whereas you only have a few hours. So, it's an inspection using normal controls, seeing if there's anything visual that is an indication of something unusual going on that might need further evaluation.
Okay. Okay. What are you looking for?
Well, right out of the gate, even before we go to the house, it's always good to try to do a little bit of investigation. We always like to have these sellers' property disclosure. A lot of times there's absolutely nothing in it besides age of systems, maybe the age of the roof, things of that nature. And then other times there's some things that might need a deeper look. So, getting that in advance and just looking up the listing to figure out how old the house is. Sometimes the age of the house gives you a tip off as to things to look out for. Houses pre-1978, there's lead paint. Houses pre-1950 potentially have, cast iron pipes, which last about a century, galvanized water supply lines, houses that were built in the early 80s to late 80s, early 90s have potential polybutylene. So, there's a multitude of things that you can get even before you walk up to the house if you're educated about it.
Wow. Okay. So that gives you a clue as to what to look for when you get to the property.
Yeah, and it can, and also, the type of house gives you a little bit of an indication of what to advise people to do. We'll talk about radon testing if you want to get into that. That's a long conversation, but the EPA would recommend everyone have a radon test at every house, even if you own a house, every 2 years because of changing geologic conditions. Radon's colorless, it's odorless, it's part of the atmosphere. There is some level of it everywhere on the planet, but you don't know unless you test. It's a dangerous radioactive gas.
Hmm.
So if you have a basement, it comes up from out of the ground. 100% of the time you should be testing. It's an ancillary test that is not included in any inspector's inspection fee. It would be an additional test that would have to be, discussed. Same thing with air quality testing, mold testing. Is it under termite bond? If it's not under termite bond, we have a relationship with Arrow where they would come out and conduct the WDO inspection. WDO stands for wood destroying organism, which is
Okay.
essentially termites. So they would come out and do that portion of it for free and write you the clearance letter should you need it. I mean, in the past, um, lenders would require it 100% of the time. Now it's up to each individual lender whether they require a WDO clearance letter. But whether they require it or not, in Georgia, every house should be being treated for termites. So.
Okay. Okay. And then what else are you looking for? So you're looking for, wood destroying organisms. And I
You
guess,
know,
uh,
a typical inspection will include all major systems, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, roofing. You're looking at the foundation. The way, one of the biggest things is, is the house managing its water properly? Water is your biggest enemy on the exterior of your house. So, are the gutters and downspouts and drainage and grading appropriate? If you're managing your water on the exterior properly, then it really, that's the one of the largest things on the outside of the house. And then, interior, you're like I said, it's a visual inspection using normal controls. So, kitchen, you're running appliances, installed appliances, up to, so like washer dryers aren't considered installed appliances, countertop microwaves not considered installed. So you're running everything using normal controls, making sure that everything is functioning normally, installed normally, taking water temperatures to determine whether the hot water heater is functioning properly, taking water pressures to make sure that there's proper water pressure in the house or it's not too high. There's a lot of different things that are involved in it. And you
uh,
have a few hours to do all this stuff. Um, so you don't necessarily always know where all your time is going to go. Um, when you start running into anomalies, could be electrical, could be windows not opening, could be plumbing anomalies, then you have to start looking deeper into those things. A lot of times, um, we may run into something. The way we write our reports is essentially, um, you know, we may be able to call out what is going on, and other times we may only know that the condition exists, but not the reasoning behind it. It might need further evaluation by another expert. That's why
okay.
it's that's why you need a bunch of time in your due diligence because although the inspector goes there, that doesn't mean that that might be the end of the process. You might need someone else. Inspectors are generalists, and then um, in building. So, do you need another expert to determine why this is going on? So we may know that some outlet's not working, but we're not doing the analytics to determine why deeper in it's not working. And is it a real big problem? I mean, you don't know until you can really delve deeper into some of those situations. So.
Right, right. I'll bet. And it makes me wonder if, when you check the mechanicals like the hot water heater and the HVAC, are you looking just to make sure that they work or are you looking for code violations like expansion tanks on a water heater, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about code here for a second.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
one of the big misconceptions. All right.
Okay.
Inspectors don't speak to code. We speak to safety. All right. But our
Okay.
safety commentary revolves around code. The reason why we don't speak to code is because uh, do you need to bring things up to code? No. All right. should you consider bringing things up to current safety standards? All right, this is literally how I will write a report. So we'll take an example, and the most common thing right now is placement of smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. In
Okay.
2008, I mean, I know code pretty well, but the fact is people don't need to bring things up to code. But for your family's safety, you should consider what the inspector's saying to bring it up to code or not. And I'll give you a bunch of different examples. So,
Okay.
carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors. In 2008, they now want them in bedrooms. Okay, smoke detectors.
Yeah.
So smoke detectors should be in bedrooms, on every floor, in any room with a fireplace, in any room with a gas-fired appliance. Right.
Okay.
But they're not in bedrooms in a lot of houses that are built after 2008. So this is a
Right.
$5 problem for your family's safety. You probably want to do that. Um, and they also have a lifespan just like everything else. So, they need to be replaced about every 10 years. So the fact that, smoke detectors are going off and making a noise when you test them don't necessarily mean that they will function during an emergency.
Yeah.
Now, circling back to the code question, right now today, somewhere in the United States, somebody's getting hurt. Either something unusual is going on, and somebody gets hurt, or potentially, deadly, or they're doing something, stupid, and that's the way they get hurt. And then code's written about it in the next version, right? This is why it's
Yep.
impossible to keep up with.
Yep.
But houses that were built to a previous standard, and I'll give you an example. So I did a house that dated to about 1910, beautiful circular staircase, and the balusters are spaced to a previous standard. They're spaced at 5.5 inches. Now, who is going to make the changes to this beautiful railing to ensure that they're up to code? Not too many people are going to ruin the aesthetics of this circular staircase and this irreplaceable historical railing to bring it up to code, right? But it's
Yeah.
still, it'll still get written in the report as a safety hazard because balusters are now supposed to be, at 4 inches. So really, it's there's some leeway in there. Do you want to do something about some of these safety hazards? Is it important? A lot of times we don't know why people are buying houses. Are they buying it for their own personal family's use? Are they buying it as a rental, a VRBO, an Airbnb, or a long-term rental? In those scenarios, some of these safety items may be things that they could get sued over. So those, are pretty important for them to upgrade, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When you said that you look at the water, like water is the first thing you look at and how it comes off of the house, I know that's really important because in my first house, the gutter was just going straight down and somehow it was back flushing up under the garage and it made a big cavern under the garage,
Yeah.
but you'd never know it from looking at the house. You'd have to tap on the garage floor to find it out, you know? But it makes, so that's obviously very important. But are you just looking at the house and like 5 feet perimeter around the house, or are you looking at the entire property? What
Well,
are you
these
looking
are the
at?
building standards, right?
Okay.
We're looking at the grounds. I mean, we're looking at the trees a little bit, but I mean, we're not arborists, right?
Uh huh.
So, whether a tree is overhanging the house, we can only say, that it probably needs to get trimmed back. We can't say whether it's going to last, X amount of years. I mean, we're not specialists in that area. But as far as water goes, and the grading around a house should slope 6 inches in the first 10 feet. So there should be a 6 inch drop from the foundation 10 feet away, right? So if your
Hmm.
downspout is spilling right next to the house, like the one that you were just talking about, and it's
Uh-huh.
only hitting a splash block, that's not pushing water far enough away from the house. It can still circle back and be sitting right there and be able to permeate underneath the house. It should really be redirected farther away. by either the black corrugated pipes, and those people don't like to put those in because I mean they're aesthetically ugly where they're sitting on top of the ground. But there are other solutions to that. They could use piece of underground pipe. It doesn't need to be piped very far, but 10 feet away, and then it comes up to a pop-up bubbler in the middle of the yard. So you only have to bury a piece of pipe 10 feet, and then a pop-up bubbler would come up when the water pressure coming out of the downspout is great enough to push it out farther out into the yard, and it takes care of it. So
Ah,
that's one
okay.
solution that people aren't aware of.
Okay. Yeah, no, usually they're thinking about like French drains and digging big
Yeah, it
trenches
doesn't
and filling them
necessarily
with
have to
gravel.
be that complicated.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. That's great information. How important is the exterior finishes to, the house and keeping the house, you know, waterproofed, I guess.
Yeah.
It seems
So, there are some products that are more weather resistant than others. All right.
mhm,
Um, Fiber cement siding, which everyone refers to as Hardy board. All right.
uh-huh.
Now everybody is making it. I mean, James Hardy was the first company that started making it. So that's why it's called, nicknamed Hardy board.
Mhm.
But, it's fiber cement siding. That's the best siding. It's water resistant. It's not waterproof, right? I mean,
Okay.
if you were to leave that out in the weather, it would still, soak up some amount of water. But LP siding, which is oriented strand board, and masonite siding, perfectly good siding products. But when it's not maintained properly, it'll still soak up water faster. Matter of fact, you know, this clipboard right here
Yeah.
is made out of masonite,
Yes.
round clipboard. This is what some siding is made out of. All right. So as long as it's painted and sealed, then it doesn't soak up water like a sponge. So is there any particularly with LP siding and masonite, those are two products that once it gets waterlogged, it won't go back to its normal original state. Insects
Yeah.
love it at that point.
Yeah.
There were lawsuits about the LP siding, and really, it's about the way it was installed, right? And
Uh-huh.
not the way it was being maintained. But maintenance of those products are very important. I mean, that's the thing about your house. You know, a lot of houses have a lot of deferred maintenance items. I've worked on houses that date back into the 1840s. I mean,
Wow.
almost everything is remediable. It's just a matter of, do you want to take these things on? And that's what the home inspector is there to advise on, is about things that are going on. And then, do you want to take this particular, every house has stuff, and every house is a little different. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I'm sure you've seen a lot of things, like horror stories or things that are really memorable. Are there any that you'd like to share?
I mean, there's too many to mention, but I mean,
Okay.
attics and crawl spaces are not my favorite places. Let me put it to you like that.
Really?
And those are places that most homeowners don't go very often, where inspectors go and they'll find a bunch of stuff going on. Um, I mean, crawl spaces are particularly unpleasant, and there's usually a bunch of surprises in there. I mean, there could be live animals down there,
Mm-hmm.
snakes, raccoons, whatever. I mean, one of my inspectors found a live snake in an electrical panel. So, anytime you have
Wow.
open knockouts in an electrical panel, small animals like to make homes in things. So, making sure that things aren't able to get into your house, very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always something unusual going on at every house. So,
It's true. And I don't know if you can actually keep squirrels out of your attic in the wintertime.
there's professionals who do fenstration. That's the word.
Yeah.
Fenstration is
Okay.
what people want to do to keep critters out. So,
Okay. And with the cross spaces, I know that there's a company who is basically they're coming in and they're digging out the cross space and they're putting concrete over it to make it clean. But it reminds me of like a swimming pool.
Yeah, they're
Um, it,
encapsulating it, is what they're doing.
okay, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is that an important thing to do, or is there a value to it at all?
Quite honestly, that's the best way to go about it. I mean, it's very expensive to do.
Uh huh.
Encapsulation, essentially, they would, they may trench it and put in a sump pump in there and then encapsulate it. And then it becomes a heated space where it's not ventilated from the outside anymore. Keeps it, at one temperature versus, if it's open to the outside, there's obviously going to be, crazy temperature swings where there's possible condensation going on in there. So encapsulating it is definitely more energy efficient. And quite honestly, that's typically the way most crawl spaces are being built today.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it because of what you're saying, the condensation? But but like if the outside temperature is different from the inside temperature, it has to
Yeah.
condensate somewhere. And if it's wood trusses or what, not trusses, floor, or is it
Floor joists.
joists?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Floor joists and insulation and water. I mean, there's multitude of reasons. You may, and radon. I mean, having a proper vapor barrier in your crawl space. I mean, encapsulation is next level of vapor barrier in your crawl space to be sure that even though you have this gap between your house and the ground, there's potential for radon to get into a house even with a crawl space. And if that happens, then you have to encapsulate to remediate it.
oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about radon. I know that it comes up from the earth,
All
and
right.
it causes cancer and it's radioactive. But other than that, I don't know anything.
Okay. So radon is part of the atmosphere. Okay, it is everywhere on the planet. There is some level of it everywhere. So where you are outside right now, there's a typical outdoor levels are zero point 0.7 picoliters. I'm not going to get into what that means, but
Okay, good.
the number for remediation in a real estate transaction is 4.0, right?
Okay.
So what radon is it's a radioactive gas. The reason why it comes up out of the ground is it's part of the uranium decay chain. So, if you looked at the EPA's website where they're saying where it's hot, where it's not, it's really not accurate, only because, it's the USGA's geological surveys estimating how much uranium they think is below the ground in the continental United States, right?
Hmm.
So uranium, solid below the ground, actually changes form. If you remember from chemistry class, it gives off three kinds of radiation. Allowed to give off, gamma radiation, beta radiation, or could give off an alpha particle. And when it does that, it changes form into a different element, right? So
Hmm.
it's a solid below the ground, keeps changing form until it becomes radium, which is the last time it's a solid below the ground, and then it changes into radon gas the next time it has a metamorphosis and gives off a burst of radiation. So it changes into a gas, and that's why it comes up from out of the ground, right?
Okay.
Um, the thing that makes it dangerous is because if you remember from chemistry class, most radioactive elements take long, long time to change into a different element. It's, like a 250,000 years or more for uranium. Radon gas changes form 5 times in under 4 days. So real quick, it's given off bursts of radiation until it changes into another solid, changes into lead, and then it becomes safe, right? So,
Uh,
there's gas floating around in your basement or part of your house that's radioactive. It's really not the gas that's dangerous. It changes into another radioactive solid, and then it's like a piece of dust floating around in the air. You breathe it into your lung tissue, where it changes form a couple more times, giving off microscopic bursts of radiation, and that's how cell degeneration happens and potential cell mutation and lung
uh,
cancer.
oh wow.
That's
Okay.
about as short as I can make it.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's excellent. that's a lot to take
Yeah,
in.
it's
So that's
dangerous, and you don't know unless you test. Colorless, it's odorless.
right.
There's multiple ways to test.
Yeah.
Short-term testing is what they typically do for real estate transactions. That test has to be in the house for 48 hours at a minimum.
Okay.
Could be extended out to 96 hours under unusual weather conditions. Or if you own a house, you can have a longer term test, 3 to 6 months is advisable. I mean, it takes an average of how much radon gas is in the air, and then you'll determine, is remediation necessary.
Okay. And how is it tested? Is there a device or is it a?
It's a couple different ways. I mean, I have a couple of them sitting right here.
Okay.
This is an e-perm, right?
Okay. Okay.
So this device actually it's an electret, has a charge on it, and then every time an alpha particle hits it, it drops by 1 volt.
Oh.
So and it doesn't drop by a lot. There's it only it you know it may drop like 15, 20 volts, but it gives you an idea of how much of these microscopic particles are floating around in the air, and then it determines the radon concentration that way. There are continuous radon monitors, right, such as
Okay.
this, kind of doing the same thing.
Uh
Um,
huh.
these will give you um, it'll give you a graph of what's going on every hour. What people don't realize is the continuous radon monitor is great, but you only get one reading.
Uh,
When we put in e-perms, there's two devices that go in those boxes. And during a real estate transaction, what you're supposed to do is if the test comes back high the first time, you're supposed to retest to confirm that it's actually high, right? So you want to validate it. But by using e-perms, there's already two devices. So one confirms the other, and short term, that it's confirmed whether there's a remediation you know, is necessary or not.
wow. Wow. Okay.
But
Okay. So that's
there's multiple other ways to test liquid scintillation, charcoal canisters. I mean, the best two, in my opinion, the best one's e-perms, only because you get two tests going in at the same time. One confirms the other at the time of the transaction.
okay.
So,
And I bet it's faster too for someone who's got a tight due diligence
yeah,
period,
you
right?
don't need to send that off. We have all the analytical equipment to do the report immediately after coming back to the office with the test.
Ah, okay. Okay, excellent. How, you know, how can you tell? How does a homeowner know who a good, inspector is, or how do you choose a good inspector? That's like one of the major questions I think that
Okay,
homeowners have.
so the thing is, it's very surprising, but you don't have to be licensed to be a home inspector in the state of Georgia. All
Ah,
right. I mean, I'm
okay.
a member of ASHI, Internachi, two of the most respected inspector associations, and they have a strict code of ethics and standards that you need to abide by. So, is your inspector? Most of the large companies abide by. They have to be a member of ASHI, Internachi. There's other schools, AHIT, GAHI. Multiple other school inspection schools. Most of them are started by former chairman of the board of ASHI. I actually prefer Internachi to ASHI personally. I think they have better continuing education. That
Okay.
you're required to take, where independent inspectors. Nothing against these guys. These guys sometimes are very, very good. May not have you know any affiliation with Ashi, Internachi, and things of that nature. So, you just need to be sure that you're working with somebody who has some some level of competency behind themselves. And then, like I was saying earlier, an inspector I should be writing the same report regardless of who it's for, whether it's for the buyer, the seller, you, my mom. I mean, it's the same report. Shouldn't vary. I've always heard about this mythical butcher a buckhead, right? So
Yeah.
there's supposedly was back in the day, and I've actually run into some real estate agents that have worked with him or against him, really. This was an inspector who would be hired to weaponize the report to beat up sellers. That's really what not an inspector's purpose is. Our inspector is to be an objective third party observer to let buyers know conditions that exist. I mean, it shouldn't be something to use to beat people up, although it is, sometimes, there are things that come up in the inspection report that need to be negotiated. And really, that's not our end of the deal. We're just there to provide the information that, may be negotiated on. But, the report shouldn't be weaponized to be used like that.
Right. Right. Exactly. So you really are just there to uh, point out the issues that might be present with the home and to not sign off on everything else, but basically say, these areas like um, the interior surfaces or the appliances in the kitchen. Those are all good. They're in working order. But if it's up to the homeowner to say, well, I want brand new Wolf Range, this 8 burner stove. That's on them,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Yeah,
during negotiations, you could ask for anything. I mean,
yeah,
you could ask them to bring you the moon. That doesn't mean that they're going to.
right,
I mean, that's probably one that would break the deal. I mean, that's the thing. During negotiations, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the inspection report to ask for. Um, but are you going to be asking for too much? I mean, we're going to write a report that may be a lot of homeowner, handyman, deferred maintenance items that really shouldn't have any, shouldn't be breaking the deal.
hmm
It's the larger ticket items that are usually the things that get negotiated on. No house is going to be perfect. Even brand new builds, I'm finding stuff. There's minor
yeah,
stuff everywhere. And it's just, that's one of the joys of home ownership. I mean, you're going to have stuff to take care of.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And I know exactly what you're saying. I've seen garage doors openings, 16 foot wide, but they're 3 inches off from side to side. That's a big difference for 16 inches when you consider that the pyramids in Egypt are like a quarter inch off and they're hundreds of feet wide.
Yeah.
So, so yeah. You mentioned like homeowner handymen and handymen. Do you encounter stuff that you see that was obviously done by someone who was unqualified that really causes problems, or for the most
I
part?
mean, we generally don't comment on quality of work. All right, like
Okay,
aesthetics, could be done poorly. We'll comment on unconventionally installed things. Okay,
okay, okay,
versus cosmetic defects. Right.
okay,
So if things are functioning the way they're supposed to function, there could be missing caulking or something like that. But I mean, if something's installed, poorly, that may, that's more of a cosmetic defect than if it is installed unconventionally with, you know, um, inadequate venting or something like that. I mean, there's a difference, but a homeowner handyman, fixes are sometimes done unconventionally. They're not using proper products. So and
right,
those things should get rectified.
right. Yeah, yeah, definitely. That also made me think of. You just made me think of bathroom vents. Like if bathroom, what is it, toilets? If they're not vented correctly, they don't flush correctly. Some do
Well, toilets are a wet vent, so that's kind of different. If you have, I mean,
Okay,
venting essentially is, for people that don't understand it, is essentially, if you took a 2 liter bottle of soda and turned it upside down, it would go glug, 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 and you'd see big bubbles going up to the top. If if you put a hole in the back of that 2 liter bottle, all of a sudden it just flows out of it, right? That's what
Right.
venting is. There should be a vent going through the roof so that some air comes into the drain system so that everything flows smoothly. That's what venting is. So if there's any kind of glug going on in any of your sink drains or anything else like that, that's
Uh-huh.
when there's something going on with your venting. Right?
Okay. Okay. Great information. Great to know. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. I learned a lot, and I know that you have a lot more to share. And I might have you back on at some point in the future.
Yeah, I
But
appreciate that. Yeah, I
yeah,
teach CE classes. I can talk for 3 hours. There's so much to talk about. We only just scratched the surface. So I appreciate you having us on.
yeah, absolutely. And I've had your contact information showing throughout this on the video, but just for those listeners that we have on Stitcher and Google and Apple and Amazon, how can people get a hold of you?
Send me an email. You can always call our office if you want to schedule an inspection. You'll get one of our inspection admins, either Leslie, Shelby, or Alex. They can help you schedule something. I can be personally reached at my email, which is below, mcaffiers@dsmillc.com. I'm chatty. I'll give you a response. We can always set up a call and talk about anything that you want to. There's so much other stuff to talk about. I mean, everyone's, I always like to hear other people's stories. There's always something unusual going on that, I may not be aware of. I mean, there's things that I haven't seen and I run into it and I got to do a little research about it. So,
Yeah, yeah. There's always something, There's
yeah.
you always run across, no matter how long you've been doing something, you always run across something. So, well, again, I really appreciate it, and I'm going to put your contact information in the description on both YouTube and
Perfect.
in all the podcast platforms. But hey, folks, join the rocket ship. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell on YouTube, and remember to subscribe if you're listening on Amazon or Google or anything else. And as always, we appreciate you. We'll see you in the next one.